Hello YouTube, and welcome to this ultimate forearm exercises tier list. I've started to develop a sort of obsession with that muscle group as of late, and I've made a ton of discoveries I want to share with you guys. I think that in terms of underrated muscle groups, the forearms really are up there. Many people don't even train them at all, and if they do train them, they do it suboptimally because they spam movements that I consider to be pretty bad. So today I've decided to cover 50 of them, 50 forearm exercises that I'm going to separate between good and bad, which is going to give you a lot of ideas, but also certain notions of what makes or breaks a good developer, a good hypertrophy lift for the forearm in particular. This is not a new concept. If you're new to the channel, I actually already did a tier list for the shoulders, for the chest, for the biceps, for the triceps, for the traps, and for the lats. So if you haven't seen these videos yet, I'm going to place them in the description for you guys. You have a ton of content to catch up on. The way I'm going to be judging these exercises is very simple and is as follows. I'm going to look at the function or the area of the forearm that the lift is supposed to develop, and I'm going to tell you guys whether or not it's doing a good job at it. If you are not familiar with the functions of the forearms, there are many, but the ones I'm going to focus on the most are going to be wrist flexion and extension, pronation and supination, and also elbow flexion and isometric contraction. All of these terms I will be repeating throughout the video. Do not be confused, do not be afraid if you don't understand. All of that is really simple biomechanics. A wrist flexion and extension is this, as simple as that. Pronation and supination is the twisting of the arm like this, and then elbow flexion is the action of moving the elbow up, with extension being the reversal of the movement. Isometric contraction is anything that is going to be a static hold, or you just hold onto the weight and nothing else happens. So as you see, very simple and standard. And then when it comes to muscles, the forearm is a complex muscle group that is made of flexors, pronators, the brachioradialis, etc., etc. This video is not going to be a course on anatomy because one, it's boring, two, I don't think it's necessary for you to understand perfectly how the muscle works and to know every single name and every single portion of it to be able to train it. I know many people with massive forearms, if I told them, hey, where is the pronator, they would not be able to answer. Does it mean that they are small? No, absolutely not. So worry not, I'm not going to focus too much on these terms. I just want you to know about them because every lift in the list is going to focus on a specific muscle of the forearm in particular. And every time I cover a lift, I'm going to explain exactly why it does the job properly or why it doesn't. And based on that judgment and objective information, I will be then placing that lift in a specific tier. And the tiers for today are as follows. D tier I called the Skeletor-tier, which is ironical because if some of you guys have seen the old school E-Man cartoon, you know that Skeletor was buff as fuck. He especially had massive forearms. So this is why I selected that name, because I find it funny that we call men with small forearms skeletons and Skeletor, even though the character in itself is massive. But this is the tier for exercises that will not give you big forearms, no matter how long you spam them, because they're simply not designed for that. These tend to be just gimmick exercises or movements that are better suited for something else. I recommend you avoid them entirely. Then there is the C tier. The C tier is the mediocre tier. These movements are not that great. They can always be better replaced. Some of them are even going to give you the illusion of progression and you'll think, oh, I'm getting stuff done. But in reality, you're not doing anything at all for the forearm. Unless you have a specific connection emotionally with the lift, I recommend you also do not do movements in that specific tier. Then there is the decent tier, the B tier. These movements are okay. You can keep using them for the forearm, but if it's the only movements you do in your training for forearms, I think that you're shortchanging yourself. You should really include some A and S tier movements, the A tier being the excellent tier. Now we're talking. Now this is money. All of these exercises will build big forearms because they have been designed to target the forearm. The number one mistake I see people make when they try to build their forearms is they use a movement that only trains the forearm as a byproduct. If you want massive forearms, you have to treat them as a priority. And this is the point of this list. This is the point of the A and S tier. The S tier for this video being the Popeye-tier. In French, we call him Popeye for my French viewers. But this is my S tier. This is my God tier. All of the exercises in there get my stamp of approval. I think that they are tremendous for developing the forearm. So if you're someone who wants massive forearms, who wants to have that mass on your upper arm in particular, and you have never done any of the exercises in the S tier, it is time for you to rush to the gym and actually give them a try. I guarantee you'll be very happy with that choice. So, now that all of this has been established, we can start with the tier list proper. And we're going to begin, as always with these episodes, with a very controversial lift, the deadlift. I couldn't tell you the amount of times I've seen people give advice to other men saying, hey, you want big forearms? Just do your deadlifts, bro, and you'll get massive forearms. That is the worst advice I have ever heard. The only thing you'll do is you'll shortchange yourself because, again, the deadlift is a posterior chain exercise. So, if you let the forearms being the deciding factor thinking you're going to grow them, not only will they not grow, you'll shortchange the gains you could have gotten from the lift. So now you get the worst of both worlds, meaning that, to me, the deadlift is a Skeletor-tier movement. If you're going to tell me, oh, if you do mixed grip, you get forearms, nonsense. The only thing you're doing is you're preventing the bar from rolling away, something that straps would do much more efficiently. This is not making the forearms work more, you're just mechanically preventing the bar from rolling. The stimulus to fatigue ratio is horrendous, meaning that let's say you want to train forearms on a day, you're going to do deadlift, so you're going to let a lift completely tax you for the rest of the week, even though you could do something that isolates the forearm instead. There is no way to argue around this one. It's a no. Then there is rows, and rows are sort of in the same category. People who say, oh, barbell rows for bigger forearms, really? So you're going to lift hundreds of pounds, pull them towards your belly button, all of that for forearms. The barbell row and rows in general are for upper back. If you allow your grip to be the limiting factor on this, again, not only are you not getting big forearms, you're also not going to get a big back. So this one I'm placing in mediocre tier. I don't think it's as bad as the deadlift, especially dumbbell rows. I would actually put dumbbell rows in between mediocre and decent tier. But the barbell row, I mean, on top of that, you're pulling the weight towards yourself. So now there's a stabilization process that occurs as well. You can't isolate the forearm in these conditions. It's impossible because you are requiring too much. You're asking too much of your brain. The coordination aspect is too high. Then another lift, a compound movement that people say builds the forearms is the pull-ups. I don't necessarily disagree with that one. To me, pull-ups are a decent exercise for the forearm. I put them in B tier. They're much better than rows and deadlifts for the simple reason that you're putting your body weight up. You don't have to worry so much about the hands opening up. I scarcely see people fail pull-ups because their hands open. If that happens to you, it means that you have a massive discrepancy and imbalance between your grip strength, your body weight, and the strength of your back, so it's something that you must correct. I think that at the end of the day, anyone who has done both heavy pull-ups with a weight around your waist and heavy rows can attest that the pull-ups do a much better job at that. On top of it, it's easier to focus on the flexion of the elbow when you do pull-ups, which is why some people say that it's also a decent brachioradialis builder. To which I say, yes, it is, but it's always beaten by isolation, as you will come to see later on in this tier list. Then we have the rack pull. So I just shat on the deadlift profusely, and you could tell me, well, then this logically means that the rack pull is going to be ranked very low. No, because the rack pull corrects all of the issues with the deadlift. If you do a rack pull, the bar is very high, so your torso is almost vertical, no tax on the lower back and the posterior chain. You are going to find also that the bar is not going to roll away because it never touches your body. It enters a vacuum that your body creates when you bend over with the bar very high. So I'm only going to place it in excellent tier because I find that, again, in the logic of thinking, okay, I want to work forearms today, doing 3 sets of rack pulls above the knee, without straps, of course, and without a mixed grip, with a normal grip, is actually not going to be that taxing. It actually will do the job of taxing the forearms. And the same logic goes with the farmer's walks. Tremendous exercise, guys, don't get me wrong. For forearms, if you do them without straps, for time, you will grow your forearms. There's no way around that, which is why it's still an A tier exercise. But I cannot put it as tier because of the tax associated. You still tax other portions of the body. To me, the number one most important factor for growing your forearms is frequency. But you need the ability to have lifts that only target them. Because if you only do compounds for forearms, you'll soon realize that the entire body gets tired, so you can't be as precise. This is the issue with farmers' walks. However, I must point to the obvious fact that people like strongmen, for example, only do farmers' walks and replicas of farmers' walks, and their forearms are absolutely jacked. But don't be the guy that only does this, because then you are truly limiting yourself. When it comes to static holds, I think that there is a definite king. A king because not only does it not tax the rest of the body, it actually deloads the spine and helps you recover faster, on top of giving great stimulus to the forearm. And that is, of course, the dead hang. The dead hang is beautiful. It's an S tier lift. Sadly, many people, when they think of dead hang, they think of rehabilitation, recovery. I know many bodybuilders who don't do them at all. I know many strength athletes who don't do them at all. And to me, that is a mistake. Include dead hangs in your program. Do a dead hang at the end of every lower body day. I guarantee you it's going to change your life. It's perfect. The issue with a pull-up is that because there is this motion of the elbow and because it's a back exercise, the forearms are not what we want to train. But with this exercise in particular, that's all you really train. You have a full stretch of the entire arm, you have a decompression of the spine, and the muscle that is solely responsible for keeping you in place is the forearm. There is no other muscle involved in this. So dead hang all day, every day. If you can get your dead hangs to 2, 3, 4 minutes, I guarantee you, you will start seeing some good results in forearm development. So this was for the movements that people do to train their forearms when in reality they only train them coincidentally. Now let's talk about things that people include in their program, in particular to train the forearms, which as you'll get to see, doesn't magically make them good lifts. Starting, for example, with the behind the back wrist curls. I used to do that movement as well. The issue with the movement is that you can load a lot of weight, but the range of motion is not the best. And on top of that, it feels really unnatural. Then there's also the issue of people having big glutes. If you pack cake, you'll find that the bar is going to run into your back, it's going to run into your glutes, you're going to have to sit the barbell way back, it's not going to be aligned with your shoulder, meaning that to me, it's only mediocre. This is C tier. When it comes to wrist curls, you can do so much better. Please don't be the guy that gets lured again by the allure of heavy weights who thinks, oh, I can lift heavier, so it's better. Not necessarily. Here, what we want is precision. Something like a regular wrist curl, for example, would give you that precision. You cannot lift as much weight with that type of movement. But there are still many issues with this. For example, the fact that many people don't feel wrist curls at all. Many times can only just lead to tendonitis in the wrist. It was exactly the case for me. No matter the form I did or the technique I applied or the weight I used, it was a wrist exercise, not a forearm exercise. And we don't want that. The goal is not to train the tendon. The goal is to train the muscle. So I'm placing this one in B tier. This is especially true for the pronated version, so the one where you're like this and you go like this. We'll find that the supinated version can be done in a different fashion so as to actually make it rank higher. But I would say that for the vast majority of the time, if you have wrist curls in your program, they can be better replaced by something else. For example, an old school type of wrist curl, a wrist curl variation that has been forgotten as of late, but that I think should make a comeback because I find that it's better suited for hypertrophy, and that is the gooseneck wrist curls that I'm placing in excellent tier. This movement was used by old school bodybuilders in the past. The first time you see it done, you'll think, oh well, there's no way I'm doing this. It looks uncomfortable and dangerous. It is quite uncomfortable, but in a sense, you're trading a form of discomfort for another. This one, you can give it a try. You'll either love it immediately or hate it. If you hate it, there's no problem with that because this is still only A tier. To me, there is still a definite king of wrist curls, and it's not a wrist curl. It's actually a forearm curl that is done in the fashion represented in this little vignette here that I'm again going to show you in the video. So S tier, Popeye-tier, because this is a movement that to me is more comfortable, more natural, uses the range of motion that is appropriate for the forearm without overextending or overflexing. I find that it's much more efficient than the pronated version. I will show you guys motions that you can do pronated to target the brachioradialis, but for this one, I think that the inner portion of the forearm is best suited for the wrist curl movement in particular, which explains why I'm not going to rank the next lift as high. And this is biceps curls. I wanted to include the curls to make you guys understand something. Just because pronations and supinations are part of the function of the forearm does not necessarily mean that the motion itself needs to be included in your program. I recommend you do, but keep in mind that if you do a curl, a normal curl, your arm is already like this. It's already in that supinated position. So when you do the movement of the curl like this, you still get tension and hypertrophy for the inner portion of the forearm. I know many people, me included, that have dominant inner forearms, as opposed to the outer portion of the forearm for the simple reason that they've been spamming curls. So this absolutely works. I don't want you guys to think that it doesn't. It's just that it's mostly a bicep movement. So this is why, to me, the bicep curl is a mediocre forearm exercise. You'll get some results as a byproduct, but it's not going to be the main muscle that the movement hypertrophies. If you want a type of curl that is going to focus more on the outside of the arm, so this outside portion right there, you can do something like a pinwheel curl that I'm going to place in B tier. This is my favorite type of curls, but I also find that when it comes to developing the forearm in particular, this is not the best. This is a great movement for the bicep and the brachioradialis. It's very comfortable on the shoulder, but the superior version to me is the hammer curl. And I say that as someone that fucking hates hammer curls because they hurt my shoulders. But objectively speaking, as a brachioradialis builder and a builder of the forearm in particular, you cannot go wrong with including hammer curls in your program. It's a staple for a reason, and this is why I'm placing it in A tier immediately. The only fault I find in the movement is its strength, which is the fact that it trains both bicep and forearms quite well at the same time. But it also means that if we took that lift and we isolated a certain portion, we could make it even more skewed towards forearm development. And this is when the preacher curl comes into play. Guys, if you want bigger forearms, locate the preacher station in your gym and go hug it. Go make it your home. It's going to be your nest for the next 5 years. You want to live at the preacher curl. Like if you want big legs, you want to live in the squat rack. Same logic here. This is the best piece of equipment for forearms, and this is why something like a preacher hammer curl I'm placing directly in Popeye-tier, S tier, because it's going to allow you to turn the hammer curl into an hypertrophy machine for the forearm. Now it stabilizes the shoulder, so you cannot cheat. It stabilizes the elbow, so you can get into the range of motion that is most suited for forearm development. And you're going to feel a stretch like nothing before because, again, the angle of the arm and the angle of the shoulder is going to be pointed upwards because you're going to be placed like this as opposed to having your shoulders here. This is night and day. If you love hammer curls, please take them to the preacher station and you're going to absolutely love them. The same goes for pinwheel curls. Between doing this on the preacher and doing this, you understand that one is going to be more comfortable. If you're like this on the preacher curl thing and you do this, your arm is going to rub against the leather. It's going to be very uncomfortable. So I recommend the hammer curl variation instead. Again, I'm the biggest hater of hammer curls. Not more than incline curls, but close. And yet I've started doing them again on the preacher and it's night and day. So absolutely give it a try. You know the type of people that spam hammer curls on the preacher station? Arm wrestlers, and arm wrestlers have tremendous forearms. So this is also why I'm placing the sport of arm wrestling in the excellent tier. I think that out of every single athlete, pound for pound, they have the biggest forearms and the most developed muscles for the simple reason that it's their fucking life. It's their sport. Like their wrist is their life. And guess what? This is very important as well. When you train forearms, you never want the wrist to break, just like in an arm wrestling match. When you're in position, if the guy can bend your wrist back, you are shit out of luck. Likewise, when you do your hammer curls, I want to see a strong, stacked wrist. I don't want to see this, right? This is going to lead to tendonitis. This never occurs. Always stacked, always strong. I've been on a huge arm wrestling kick, and this is why my forearm training has jumped to a whole new level. And I'm here today to share all of that wisdom with you guys in this tier list. Case in point, arm wrestlers train forearms 5 to 6 times a day, every single day, and they don't burn out or are not under-recovered. So this is a lesson to take to heart. You want bigger forearms. Before the forearms grows, you have to grow something else first, and that is your work capacity. And then when it comes to other types of sports that also develop massive forearms, I think that including rock climbing is only fair. I did rock climbing when I was a young lad and I was only 160 pounds. And I have always noticed that on a rock climber's body, the muscles that stand out the most are the back, but also the forearms. They tend to have ripped forearms. Now, I'm not going to place it in A tier because the issue is that they're limited by their weight, something that arm wrestlers won't have to deal with. So this is only B tier. But I'm certain that some of you guys watching this video right now, you've never retrained your forearm in the gym, but because you've been rock climbing for a while, especially bouldering, you have monster forearms. And that is only logical. You grab and you pull all the freaking time. So doing some non-competitive rock climbing on the side can be a good idea. But to get back to this notion of arm wrestling and of the importance of training like an arm wrestler when it comes to developing the forearms, I want to introduce to you guys a lift that I've discovered again thanks to the arm wrestling community that has completely changed my understanding of forearm development and that I fell in love with, and that is what I call a pronation twist. I guarantee you right now, I would put money on the fact that none of you guys do it either. This is a pronation, this is a supination, right? The pronation twist is a simple lift where you're going to have weight here, so it's supposedly resting on your wrist or into your hand, and you're going to just do that. You're just going to do a pronation. And it looks like nothing, but I can guarantee you that if you have 20, 30 pounds weighting off of your hand and you do that movement times and times again, as if you're looking at the time, you look at the time and you do that movement here, you can change the angle. Arm wrestlers like to do it here. I like to do it here. You can do even a flexion of the elbow motion. So you do a mix of a hammer curl and a twist. If you give this a try, in the gym, I guarantee you it's going to become a staple. You will start spamming that movement because it's super friendly on the elbow, super friendly on the shoulder, on the wrist, and it's like the purest form of isolation I've ever felt for the forearm in particular, especially for a portion of the forearm that is highly underdeveloped in most people, but that is key because to me it looks super cool. It's that portion right here. So if you can see, if I flex it like this, you see a bump right there. Many people mistake this for a tendon. This is no tendon. This is your pronator, and it can grow. And it can grow so much that it bulges out of your arm. If you've ever noticed, look at the arms of arm wrestlers, and you'll notice that they have bulging pronators. Why? They train it all the time. It's their life and death. It's their safety insurance policy. If their pronators fail, their wrists are bent back and they lose the match. Same for rock climbers. Rock climbers have shockingly developed pronators for the same reason. There's also a third class of quote-unquote athlete, which in its case it's more artists, that have massive pronators. It's people who play the guitar because they do wrist flexions and motions and pronations all the time. So you'll see a guy with a skinny body and then massive forearms, and when he does this, you'll see some tumor pop right there and you'll be like, what the fuck is this? Is this an injury? It's no injury. It's a muscle that most people neglect entirely. So this is why I say, please include pronation twist into your program. Again, I'm placing the pronation twist as S tier. It is gorgeous. Now, you could tell me, okay, if the pronation twist develops this specific part of the arm that is neglected, how about the supination? Well, it's not as simple. You see, I believe that when it comes to the supination rotation, so the action of having the palm face upwards like this is already something that you train a lot via curls. I cannot rank it as high. If you're an arm wrestler, of course, it's necessary, but if you're just a gym rat, I don't think you should include it in your program. I'm still placing it in the B tier, but this one is not as hype and is not as effective. I have found it's also more uncomfortable. And again, it trains certain muscles that are already redundant when it comes to other lifts I've already covered. Now, I can already hear you guys in the comments asking me, NH, what type of weight am I supposed to use for that pronation or that supination exercise? Am I supposed to use dumbbells? And the answer is absolutely not. Because if you did use dumbbells, you would be guilty of the cardinal sin that the next movement on this lift actually commits. And that is to not understand the way gravity works when applied to forearm development. The issue, if you try to do this twisting motion with a dumbbell, is that now the weight sits outside of the hand, but it's not pulling you downward, it's pulling you to the side. The only thing this is going to do is it's going to lead to tendonitis, pull gains. It's, in a sense, a wrist curl, but worse. And this is why the next movement, the dumbbell wrist twist, I'm placing in Skeletor-tier. I want to see this movement gone. I want it dead. I want this video to be its burial site. Please stop it. I am tired of seeing people, noobs, with skinny forearms in the gym like idiots like this with 5-pound dumbbells in their hands. This does nothing. You cannot load appropriately. The strength curve is horrendous. Most of the time, you'll find that you cannot use a lot of weight because of the position of the wrist. This is not the way you're supposed to train pronation and supination. You want to train these functions? Great. Get a belt, get a loop around your hand like this, and dangle plates from them. That way you're actually pulling onto something. It's not sitting outside of the wrist. This should be obvious, but I know for a fact that many people don't know that because they still do that movement. So this is a no. Please stop doing that. For forearm development, dumbbells have their place, but you're going to have to get a little bit more imaginative when it comes to functions that cannot be trained with that type of straight weight. There's a saying that goes that hell is paved with good intentions. And I think that the dumbbell wrist twist is like that. It's people who actually want to, for once, train their forearms, but they go about it the wrong way. The next movement on this list is the same, meaning that it's someone somewhere who thought, okay, this movement that I'm going to be covering right now is great for forearms. So if I pair it with the preacher station that is also great for forearms, then it should be a match made in heaven. It should be a godlike movement. The issue is that, again, it's not taking into account the specificities of forearm training. I'm talking in this case about the preacher reverse curls. Spoiler alert, the reverse curl is an S tier movement. But if you do it on a preacher curl, it's only C tier. It becomes mediocre. Why? Because it modifies the angle of the elbow and of the shoulder, and it modifies the angle of the palms. When you do normal reverse curls, your palms are sitting on top of the bar like this in a position where at the top of the movement you're here, okay? If you are on a preacher, now you're placed in this position, look at where your hand is in comparison to your elbow and to the bar. Now you're not stacked anymore. On top of that, in this position, the bar is pointing outward, so it's not straight down stacked with the wrist, meaning that it's going to become much tougher to grab. So the more you're going to go outside of center mass and outside of your body, the tougher the movement is going to become. Not because the form gets recruited more, but because it becomes almost impossible to actually hold on to that weight because it wants to roll outside of your fingers. Now the pressure is on the fingertips. You always want to have a strong, solid grip and control on the bar. So if the bar starts resting here instead of here, you understand that you already lost the battle, which is why I highly discourage you guys from doing your reverse curls on the preacher station. You want to do that movement? Stay classic, stay orthodox. Do them standing up, and just like that, the lift becomes S tier again. There are many ways to go about it. Some people like a full grip. I personally recommend a thumbless grip for that movement for the same reason. If you grab onto the weight, there's going to be a tendency of the ball to creep upwards. But if you grab it thumbless, it cannot creep upward because you create a pocket like this for the weight. And the thumb now is not wrapped around anymore, so there's no space here. It creates a restriction. It's going to be harder. You might not be able to use as much weight, but I guarantee you that the sensation you will get on your forearms is going to be absolutely unmatched because you are meeting the specificities of that muscle group in particular by paying attention to the hand. And this is why when it comes to training techniques, I'm also going to rank the thumbless hand as B tier. It might sound silly, but if you start applying that specific grip to more and more of your forearm and bicep movements, you'll find that there is something to it, something very specific. Do it for pull-ups, for example. Attempt doing your pull-ups with a thumbless grip and come back to me. It's just a thumb, but the entire kinetic chain changes because what matters when you do your forearm exercises is the hand, the shape of the hand, the movements of the elbow and of the wrist, of course. So give it a try. Something that I also recommend you guys do is try towels. If you want to spice up your forearm training, take any movement that are ranked low for forearm development, add a towel, and suddenly they become good. You want to do rear delt rows? C tier for forearms. You do them with a towel? B tier. You want to do pull-ups without towels? B tier. You do them with towels? A tier. It's as simple as this. Why? Shape of the hand. Now you're going to have to shape the hand around the towel. Your fingers are going to be more heavily involved. And all of this makes a complete difference for a piece of equipment that I had that is extremely cheap. So I want all of the gym rats in the world to rush into Bed Bath & Beyond tomorrow and buy their towels. You want a towel that is thick but not too thick, and if possible, coarse. This is not something you're going to wipe your ass with, it's something you're going to grab. So not something that is going to actually absorb your sweat and something that is going to be rough to the touch. And because of how cheap a towel really is and how long lasting it is, I cannot put it lower than B tier. But there is a piece of equipment that, unlike towels, have actually been created specifically to challenge the forearms, and that is fat grips. Fat grips are the holy grail of forearm development. Many people push fat grips, but this time for a reason. This is not the deadlift or rows gimmick fade. This is an actual good solution to grow your forearms. Slap a pair of fat grips onto your dumbbells, onto your barbells, and just like with towels, you will find that movements that were not that good for forearm development now become excellent, which is why I'm putting the fat grips in the excellent tier. Please do not get scammed by these people who sell their fat grips at 50 fucking bucks. No piece of plastic is worth that much. Get cheaper ones, not too cheap, but you'll find that for the most part, they all do the same thing. Also, don't get them too big. I see guys who get fat grips so big that their hands are like this. You want something where you can still sort of close the hand a bit. I think that the gold standard when it comes to fat grip is getting something where your fingers can barely touch. And that is going to do plenty to challenge the forearms. Don't go too extreme. And what I find particularly good about the fat grips is that you can bring them to the gym. Make sure you don't forget them because people will steal them. And on top of that, they're adaptable. They can go on anything and any implement, and you get to decide the thickness, as opposed to an axle bar. Axle bars are a strongman specialty. They're good, don't get me wrong, but the problem of the axle is that you don't get to pick the thickness. It's a given thickness and that's it. So they're still good, but they're not as adaptable. So I'm only placing them in the B tier. So based on what I just told you, you could tell me, okay, if opening up the hand and playing with the angle of the fingers makes a massive difference for forearm development, how about reducing that angle? How about closing the hand? I would say that's a good idea, actually. You can play around as much as you want. But there are certain things to avoid. For example, the plate pinch. This one is a favorite of boomers in the gym, people who like to compete without actually taking any risks. And for the most part, it's horrendous for the simple reason that it's very hard to progressively overload and it's not practical. Let's say you add the plate pinch, so the action of pinching a plate and holding it as an isometric contraction onto your program. Great. All right, you start with 10 pounds. Where do you go from there? How do you go to 15 pounds? You're going to put a 5 on top of the 10, that's going to slide all the way. Then you get to 20 pounds, great. 30 pounds, 40 pounds. Let's say you get to 45 pounds. Okay, how do you go from there? Again, you slide a plate, a 5-pound plate. It's simply not practical. And if you get really strong at it, what do you do then? You will get to a point where there will be so many plates that it's not just that you won't be able to grab it. Your hand physically will not be able to sandwich the plate. So this is something that is fun to do with friends once in a while, with 45s at the end of a training session just to feel a burn. But do not count on this to give you big forearms. To me, this is simply mediocre. But you can do worse. I've seen people do worse, and actually it's sort of a trend. It's dead now, but it was at a time a thing where people would flip plates. So they would do a plate pinch and they would flip it and try to catch it. I've seen videos claim that this is the best way to grow your grip strength. I'm not a grip strength guy, but I think that logically speaking, this sounds very dubious for the simple reason that it's a circus act. It's about coordination and reflexes, not grip strength. I mean, you need the grip strength to catch the plate when it's falling, but you're also fighting against gravity and you're fighting against the momentum of the plate. There are so many better ways to train grip strength. On top of that, if you fuck up and the plate lands on your toes, you sacrifice a bone for measly gains. That's idiotic. That is Skeletor-tier. Pun intended. I just made a bone joke, so I'm literally turning into Brooke from One Piece. Now, if you want to flip something in the gym, something that is going to be safe and actually get you result in terms of forearms, I think you should do it with kettlebells. Kettlebells are gravely underestimated when it comes to developing the forearms, and this is something that I'm seeing make a comeback and I'm very happy with. You can place a kettlebell face down onto a surface and try and flip it up. This is helped by the fact that the kettlebell is actually designed to be grabbed, so it's not a plate, it's not as silly. And on top of that, there is tension all throughout the motion. You don't get the negative, so it's why I'm only going to place that kettlebell forearm flip in the decent tier. But I find that this is something that stimulates only the forearms, doesn't tax any other joints, doesn't tax any other muscles, which is the hallmark of a good forearm exercise. If you look at the list, that's something that you've noticed at this point. And this is something that makes powerlifters and strength athletes in general scream in anguish, but as a bodybuilder, that's the way to go. We want to do compound movements because it involves many muscles at once and it's a great mass builder. But we also want to do the opposite and shrink back from the compound into an isolation. And you can do that by bastardizing compound movements. Example, the pull-up. The pull-up is a decent forearm builder, but you can make it so that it's entirely skewed towards the development of the brachioradialis in particular if you do them with partials. Pop quiz. What portion of the pull-up trains the back? If you answered the top, you're an idiot. It's the middle and the lower portion, the bottom portion of the lift. The top portion is about shoulder flexibility and it's mostly arms. So, logically, this means that if we only do the top portion where the arm is already almost entirely flexed like this and we just focus on doing this motion right there, we're going to get mostly forearms. And this is where arm wrestling pull-ups come into play. You do them with a neutral grip, you can do them with fat grips, it feels godlike. Oh my god, the feeling of the forearm is so good. When you cup like this, and you're in this position here, and you do them like this, absolutely try them at home. It is incredible, but they require a ton of wrist rigidity because if you fall in this position, the wrist breaks, you're going to fall, etc., etc. It's not dangerous, it's just that the set is going to end there. For people who are not quite there yet, it's fine. You can just do a neutral grip without involving the wrist too much. It's still going to train the forearm tremendously. And if you stay within the top range of motion, you'll get mostly forearms. So this is why, to me, the arm wrestling pull-up is excellent tier. And when it comes to ranking the burn, I know people love the burning sensation. This one is a king. Like this portion of the forearm is going to be screaming in agony. Something you can also replicate with the next lift on this lift that is a bit of a meme, the newspaper twist. I remember way back in the day, out of manliness, making a list of old school forearm exercises that men would do in the comfort of their home without equipment, and this was one of them. So you read the news and you're like, oh, the bank failed again and they were magically saved by the government, how strange. And then you take that newspaper because you're full of rage because of the state of capitalism, and you start to twist the forearm like a maniac as you see your children and wife cry in anguish because they logically understand that the next logical step is you going into the garage, grabbing the axe and murdering your entire family. See, this is a movement that is very romantic, but that doesn't do much. And on top of that, you also understand that it's not replicable because how many newspapers do you need to actually get a decent forearm exercise off of this? I mean, you'll get a sweet burn, but you won't build mass. And if you did build mass, again, how many newspapers are you tearing? There's a very strong chance that before you can get any sort of gains, Greenpeace is going to knock at your door and shoot you in the face for all the paper that you are actually wasting. So I'm putting that in the D tier. I'm certain that none of you guys were actually going to try this, but you never know. At the end of the day, there are still people who think they're going to get the physique of Guts from Berserk by swinging a sword. So I want to do some prevention and make sure that you guys don't waste your time with stupid movements. The next one on the list is not stupid. I rank it low because for hypertrophy, don't do much. It's mostly for the burn and for blood flow. And that is the elastic. So it's an elastic that you wrap around your hands and fingers and you do this. This is a motion that is entirely ignored by 99% of the gym population, especially people who train forearms and grip all the time, which is a mistake because this will save your life. If you have tendonitis in the elbow, if you have impingements in the wrist, all of this can be taken care of by this movement. I've been shilling this shit ever since I started the channel. You can still find videos from 3 years ago where I recommend that you guys get this in particular. You get it once, it's going to last you for the rest of your life. It's $5. Please do that. Especially if the exercises in this tier list are going to motivate you to train forearms more, you will need to recover more. So a form of active recovery like this and of blood flow recovery and rehabilitation is going to be tremendous. The only issue I have found is that because you do it with your fingers and because it's with a band, the tension is localized on the fingertips, which can lead to knuckle tendonitis. Believe it or not, I got knuckle tendonitis from this shit. So if you're one such man, I have a replacement, something that sport therapists have known for a very long time, and that is the rice bucket. So you take a rice bucket or a sand bucket, it's better with rice, you plunge your hand into it and you do this. You just extend and close. You open and close the hand. That is going to give you a massive pump and it's very, very good for recovery. So I'm placing it in the B tier. On top of that, then you can make a delicious meal as well. The good thing with rice being, of course, that it's very cheap, which is not the case for the next installment of this tier list, grip tools. If you're familiar with the world of grip sports, you know that it's essentially a sport where you're told to grab onto certain types of implements that are shaped in different fashions that force the hand to open, to close, to pinch, etc., etc. And these guys have massive forearms for a simple reason. They only do that. That's all they do. Their forearm is their bread and butter. So logically, the forearm grows. My issue and pet peeve with this is that the prices are crazy high. It's $50-$60. I'm not going to dock points for it. I'm just saying that there are easier and cheaper ways to train your forearms. So I'm going to place it in the A tier. I find that this might be a good way to remedy the boredom of isometric contraction because it's like a game. So if you're someone who likes to compete and especially who likes to progressively overload, it'll be better this way because you'll be constantly challenged and stimulated. But for the rest of you guys, I think that I have now listed and outlined many of the movements that replicate this static hold function of the forearm and of the hand that do not require you to actually spend so much money on gym equipment. Whereas something like a wrist roller is very compact, mostly made of plastic, can get through the airport, and will be your best friend because if you're smart enough, you can link it to pretty much any type of weight, a backpack, any sort of plates that you have laying around, even if they're old or dusty, you can always manage if you have enough imagination to get something loaded. And it's also a two-in-one because you get both flexion and extension of the wrist. And I think that this is a must-have for any home gym owner or people who train at home. If you're the type who says, I will do forearm at home, I hope that you have one of these. The only thing that could dampen the effectiveness of this lift is if you did it with extended arms. I don't understand why people do them like this. Like fully extended like this. Why do you think you're getting from this? The only thing that happens is that you get more range of motion if the tread is long enough. And now the shoulders become the limiting factor because they have to hold the weight. Most of the time you're going to fail not because the forearms are done, but because the shoulders cannot hold in position anymore. That's stupid. The easier and the logical way to do your wrist roller is like a T-Rex, like this. You want to be in this position and you do your movement like this. It makes so much more sense, it's so much more comfortable, and on top of that, you feel the forearms more. Why? Position of the hand in relation to the weight. When you're like this, the weight is hanging straight down. Pushing on what? The fingertips. No bueno. When you're like this, the weight is sitting here, straight in line with the wrist, so it dangles from the wrist and not from the fingertips, making it much easier to grab onto so you can get more reps, and it's more effective for forearm hypertrophy. So wrist roller straight into S tier. If you pick one forearm implement or equipment, it should be this one and not the next one on the list. So I'm going to make many enemies and I'm going to shock some of you right now. But I'm going to place the gripper, the hand gripper, into mediocre tier. Let me explain why. Many people, when they think forearm development and forearm equipment, they think hand gripper. But if you look at the actual function of the forearm that is being fulfilled by the gripper, you'll come to realize that it doesn't do much because the only thing it does is you close, so it's crush, and then you open with almost no pressure or resistance because there is technically no negative to the movement. So it's a concentric only motion that focuses on crush strength. Is it bad? No. Is it good? Also no. If you look at any type of strongman, rock climbers, arm wrestlers, none of them use grippers. I know that some of you have seen Brian Shaw using grippers. It was always because he was in connection with a certain company that sells grippers. It was all part of the hype. The appeal of grippers is that it's exciting because you get to test your strength. You get to see how strong you are and how much you can crush. But beyond that, it really doesn't do much. Even for grip strength, it's not that good. And this is coming from someone who is obsessed with grippers. I've been using them for years, I think 11 or 12 years. I started as a young guy with the plastic ones from Decathlon from France. Then I upgraded and I eventually got to the metal ones from Captain of Crush. And I got to 2.5. So I got a decent amount of strength. And then I looked at my forearms and I realized, damn, I didn't get much from this. My forearm size didn't grow much from that. It grew from other things, from reverse curls, from wrist curls, from pull-ups, tower pull-ups. That did the job. This didn't do much. The only thing it did is it grew this portion of my arm. So this, I can 100% say that this bump that you see here is grippers. But for the rest, I mean, this I could have developed by doing more flexions of the elbow. This is really not a necessary piece of equipment at all. So if you like them because you like the challenge, by all means do it. But do not be the guy who, when he's told, hey, do you train forearms, answers, yes, I do grippers. This is not forearm training. This is something entirely different. If you want to replicate this motion of the opening and closing of the end that I understand is important for forearm development and even for function as a human, you can do it much more efficiently using free weights, because the issue with the gripper as well is that it presses into your hand. So it actually assists you throughout the movement and you don't get the negative, because when you actually reverse to open the hand, you just essentially let the weight tear your hand open. You're not resisting against anything, which I have found can actually lead to some problems in the hands, which is a bitch because you want to train your forearms. Not only do you not get the gains that you want, now you get tendinitis and you get pain in the wrist and the fingers and the hand. There is no point to that. Instead, I recommend you do finger curls. Again, finger curls have been chilling on this platform and on this channel for forever. It is the superior version of the gripper. A finger curl is essentially a wrist curl you do standing up, where you let the hand open, rest the weight on the fingertips. I'm going to explain to you later why it's not a problem, and then you close the hand. This replicates the crushing, but when the weight goes down and you open the hand, now the weight pulls. It pulls on the forearms. It extends the forearms. You get the negative, you get the positive. It's the best of both worlds. You can do it with a cable. So if you're someone who likes to have the weight pull in front of you, you set the cable in front of you like this and you do this. And this is where we get to the explanation as to why it's fine to have the weight in this position here. It's because a finger curl is not this. Okay, I see people do this. This is not a finger curl. This is a finger curl. The flexion and extension of the wrist is what makes or breaks the movement. So the cable version, I'm putting directly in the A tier. If you do the finger curl with a dumbbell, now it's even more effective. Dumbbell finger curls, S tier, no questions asked. If you're the type who does wrist curls, please switch them out for finger curls. For 1 week, 2 weeks, you will never put wrist curls back into your training. Finger curls are simply superior. You can also do them with a barbell. I personally don't like the barbell because I have big legs and a big ass. So be it in front or behind me, the bar runs into my body. And if I start moving the body back, now I create a lever and moment arm, which then would create a situation where having the weight rest on the fingertip is a bad thing because it would pull me in front instead of pulling me downward directly, which would artificially make the lift tougher and not actually correlate with more hypertrophic benefits. And the beautiful thing too is that, as I said, cables, dumbbells, barbells do the trick. You don't need the fancy machine, which is why the next installment on this list, I was very perplexed to even find available on eBay, and that is a machine finger curl, meaning that some maniac out there thought, hey, you know what would make bank? Is if I made a machine for a lift that no one does to start with. I think this guy is bankrupt in a forest somewhere in Germany. It does everything wrong. Everything that you like with a finger curl, it doesn't do. So it robs you of gravity and of actually having to catch the weight on the fingertips. It creates a space between the two balls you're supposed to squeeze together that is artificial and most of the time not adapted to your hand. It also allows you to load a shit ton of weight so you can put 45s. But who on earth is going to use a 45 for finger curls? This is a lift you're supposed to do with lightweight because it's isolation. So overall, I simply do not understand why this machine exists. I highly doubt you're going to find it in your commercial gym, but if you ever actually run across it, it'll be a good indication that whoever owns your gym is not very wise with money. So I'm putting it in mediocre tier. When a machine gets outdone by free weights on the same movement it's supposed to optimize, you know it's a shit machine. But we can find worse. In my quest of perusing the internet to find certain types of implements that people, especially men, buy to develop their forearms, I found this utter abomination called the Forearm Developer that is essentially a piece of plastic you put around your hand and wrist and forearm so as to be able to replicate extensions and flexions of the wrist. The thing looks like a BDSM device. This is typically the type of crap that middle-aged men buy, use one time, then they put it in the garage and it just collects dust for the next 55 years. Until their kids find it one day when the guy is dead and they think, dad was into some weird stuff. I was, of course, not surprised to find that this is a bestseller, even though it's $50 fucking for a piece of plastic. I'm putting it in Skeletor-tier. Not only is it a ripoff, it looks uncomfortable. You end up purchasing a contraption that is going to rub against your forearm, that is going to limit the range of motion, that is going to be horrendous progressive overload, and most likely be a tendinitis machine. And on top of that, it provides absolutely zero extra benefits when compared to the other lifts that are already outlined. And I wanted to include it so that you guys really understand the power of marketing. It doesn't matter how efficient a piece of equipment is. If you make it black, shiny, and cool, men are going to buy it. Don't be an idiot and don't buy that. Instead, go for time-tested things. Rough-looking equipment, stuff that get the shit done. Example, rings. People don't think of rings as something to use for forearm development, but you can do your rows with it, and you can do a very comfortable thumbless grip with it. So rings to me are mediocre. Which you could tell me, well, I mean, that's still C tier, it's shit. Yeah, but no one buys rings to train forearms, so it's shocking that they're ranked higher than a product that is twice as expensive that only does that. This forearm developer shit only trains forearms, it's the only thing you can do with it, and it doesn't even do it well. Whereas with rings, you can do a million of things with rings. Rings are your best friends. And the same goes for the next item on the list, which is a simple hammer. So if you possess a hammer, what you can do is you just grab it, and you resist the traction of the top of the hammer before it hits your head. Please do not actually do it aligned with your head, do it aligned with your shoulder. That way, if push comes to shove, you just end up with a small bruise on your shoulder instead of caving your skull in. I think that you would agree that the trade-off is quite severe in this case. And this is also something that grip sports test their athletes on. My only issue with the lift being that, in this case, the positive is not really a positive, it's a reversal. And on top of that, how do you progressively overload? Are you going to buy 15 hammers that you're going to go from hammer to hammer? I mean, you could if that's your thing, but it would be a waste of money in my opinion. So only B tier. And the last entry on this forearm equipment list is the forearm twister. So this also trains extensions and flexions of the wrist, but instead of doing it with weights dangling from a roller, you do it with something that resembles a spring. I find personally that it's slightly inferior to the free weight variation because now you're fighting against the mechanism instead of the weight, so there's not as much stretch on the forearm and it can be uncomfortable. And on top of potentially leading to tendonitis and wrist problems, it's also very expensive. So I don't see why you would get this instead of the wrist roller. But again, maybe some of you guys got swindled into purchasing this product in particular because of the marketing associated with it that is quite aggressive and tries to link it with masculinity. The same goes for the next lift. If you're a man and you watch Rocky or any type of fighting movies or boxing movies, you've done knuckle push-ups at least once in your life. Why? It's cool. But the issue is that it don't do much. I mean, I'm no martial artist, so I'm not going to speak for people who use their fists on a daily basis, but for forearm development, pray tell me, what function of the forearm does a knuckle push-up accomplish exactly? Nothing. It's not even an isometric contraction. You just close your hand and then you use the hand to do push-ups. So it does absolutely nothing, and I'm putting it in Skeletor-tier. And the same goes for the next lift. This one hurts my heart because I love that movement dearly, but fingertip push-ups also do jack shit for hypertrophy. Again, I got them to a 2-finger push-ups. You can find the videos on my channel. It never did a jack for my forearms because beyond making the fingers more resilient, which can be useful if you rock climb, the forearms are just in an extended position with the wrist also in an extended position, and that's that. There's no pressure on the forearm, there's no movement of the hand, nothing occurs. And even though there is movement of the elbow, it's an elbow extension, a function fulfilled by the tricep. So likewise, Skeletor-tier. And I forgot to actually place it, but the forearm twisters I placed in excellent tier. And when it comes to fingertips and badass movements that people are going to do thinking is going to go to their forearms, the next is the same, the fingertip pull-ups. Fingertip pull-ups look cool, but for the same reason, they don't fulfill any of the function of the forearm, save for making your fingers more resilient and less likely to pop out of their sockets. So even though, again, it's a massive flex, it actually doesn't do anything for forearm hypertrophy. So I'm placing them in mediocre tier. If you want a movement that is more athletic and more linked with calisthenics that is still going to greatly develop the forearms, you should give rope climbing or rope pulling a try. I'm putting it in the decent tier. It's everything that you want that the fingertip pull-ups cannot do. You get to grab the rope with the entirety of the hand, you get to manipulate the angle of the wrist, so you can manipulate the flexion and extension, you get to decide the involvement of the back by playing with the angle of the elbow as well. You should look at that rope as an implement to use to develop the forearm. And if you think about it that way, you're going to be able to approach it as an hypertrophy exercise instead. The same goes for all of the lifts on this list. Wrist manipulation and elbow manipulation as you do the motion is key. It's not enough just to move the weight. How you move the weight also matters. And this is why the next movement exemplifies perfectly all the traits that you want to find in a good forearm movement. It's range of motion that keeps the forearm engaged and tense, a stretch of the forearm during the negative, and an ability to control the angle of the wrist as you do the motion. This one I nicknamed the hangman curl because you do it with a rope. And I'm putting it in the S tier. If you have a home gym and you don't have a cable station, it's fine. Just grab a rope, loop it around plate, and you can do it. You're not going to get the same tension throughout the motion as with a cable station, but it's still going to be great. And if you do have a cable station and you are looking for an exercise for your forearms in particular, this one is your go-to. It feels tremendous. And as I said, the beauty of it as well is that as you do the movement, as you go up, you can tilt the wrist backwards so as to flex and to fill the entirety of the forearm and brachioradialis. Something that is not possible with dumbbells, because tilting the wrist up when you're holding onto a rope is entirely different than doing it when you're holding onto a dumbbell, which is why I cannot place the final lift on this list any higher. The Zottman curl is mediocre. It's liked by some people because it's a little bit two-on-one. You feel like you're getting forearms, you're getting biceps. For the most part, as I said, if a lift does more than just forearms, this means that it does forearm development poorly. This is a key example. This rotation of the wrist with the weights in your hands means that the strength curve is horrendous because you're using dumbbells. And on top of that, you will not be able to use appropriate weight to challenge the biceps because you will be limited by the forearms, which means that once again, you're getting the worst of both worlds. And I think that this is a perfect way to conclude this video because it gives you a good comparison to keep in mind when it comes to picking forearm exercises. But with this list, you have a ton to work with. You have all of the necessary functions of the forearms that are being covered, along with every single portion of the muscle in particular. And if you add the movements of the B, A, and S tier to your training regimen, you will see results. Most of the time, when we're talking natural lifters, the ones with the bigger forearms are the old gentlemen. They're the people who have been doing it for a long time. Why? Because they have given time to the muscle group to grow. So if you want these massive, juicy, stacked forearms when you are in your late 20s, early 30s, and you want to be the dad at the playground that puts all of the other dads to shame because his forearms are so massive that he mugs them into oblivion, start getting serious about your forearm training, and I guarantee you will not be disappointed. And if you're a bit confused as to how to implement these movements into a training program, I actually outlined a method from A to Z to grow your forearms. It is going to be in the pinned comment. It's the Forearm Master Plan. It's going to take you from stick forearms to massive, juicy forearms in 1, 2, 3 years, as long as it takes. This is a game of patience, and it's especially true with forearms. Now, I'm going to leave you with that. The next installment of the tier list is going to be for the legs, posterior chain, and hamstrings in particular. You can look forward to it, and I will be seeing you very soon.